Alright, here is another quick look at motion interpolation, motion estimated interpolation, that is. This is a castle scene rendered by Shlomi Malachi, and it's of course Scloss Neuschwanstein. But what we are going to focus on is a sort of a comparison of three different ways to do a motion interpolation. What you're looking at right now here is a 60 frames per second playback, pretty fast playback of a very slow motion modification of something that started with just 4 frames. Just 4 frames rendered. Each frame took about an hour and a half to render. So you can imagine you don't have the time to render this at 30 frames a second if you want it to last something like 4 or 5 seconds. Right, and that's what this is. We have 220 frames here exactly. Alright, and let me show you a couple of other versions. This one down here is the same thing, 220 frames, but without any motion, without any transition. Actually, hold on. This is wrong. This is the one here. Alright, so this one is the one with frame blending. Alright, let's start with this one. What we have here is no frame blending, so it's kind of choppy. You can see that as I'm scrubbing through the frames here. Maybe I give myself a little bit more. So you see there is nothing happening within this range here, and then suddenly around here it changes, and then nothing happening for a bunch of frames, and just around here it changes again, and nothing happens until it changes again here. So there's only 4 frames, it seems, and that's actually what happened. I loaded initially under the animation menu. I loaded 4 frames. Loading a sequence of just these first 4 frames. There's actually a total of about 40 or so, but I only loaded 40 frames, and those 44 frames, excuse me, and those 4 frames define a very short animation. And if you play that at even just 30 frames a second, it's going to be very, very choppy and frantic, right? I mean, you see it's done in no time, and it just keeps looping and cycling. So you want to slow this down. The traditional way is to do frame blending, or even no frame blending. Just do this, right? The time stretch. Right click on that and say no frame blending, but I want 220 frames. Now you can do that in one step, or you can do it gradually. Build it up to double the initial frames, like from 4 to 8 frames, and then to 16, 32, 64, 128, and eventually go up to 220. Or you can go in one step. It's going to be the same result in the end, because if you're not doing any frame blending, it's going to have a number of frames staying put, no change, and then suddenly it changes and moves a little bit, and moves again a little bit further, and a little bit further down it moves. But this is a jumpy move. You see that transition right there, right? So this is not really a smooth transition, not a nice smooth animation. You play it, nothing happens, and then suddenly you blink and it's moved, and then it's again moved to the next place, and that's it. There's only 4 different frames. You can see them. Instead, we would like to have sort of a transition from one frame to the next, to the 3rd frame, and then to the 4th frame, and have that gradual, not just a sudden jump like this here, right? But have that really be a gradual transition. So that gradual transition you can actually get if you enable frame blending. Under the time stretch, you can go to enabling frame blending, and you say you want 220 frames. Now you need to start from the 4 original frames for that. So let's go load the sequence again. The first 4 frames right there, and there you go. And so now we go to right here, right click on that and select time stretch and enable frame blending, and make sure it is the same frame count of 220. And so now at this point, what it's doing is it's taking the first frame and stretching that across about, I don't know, 40 frames or so, and gradually blending it out while it's blending in the next frame. The next frame is coming in and staying for about 40 or 50 or 80 frames, and then it's blending out as well, and it's making room for the 3rd frame. So what you see is it's gradually moving and transitioning. And if you don't pay attention to it, it might look like, oh, that's a nice smooth transition. But you can actually tell, especially if you zoom in, that it is blending away. It's blending out the old frame while blending in the new frame. Right here, you can tell, here's the old frame. and is blending it away. And the new frame comes in, gradually doing a frame blending. That's what that is all about. Now, if it moves very slowly, you can barely tell. It still looks a little bit blurry or jittery. And what it actually does is it looks like a ghost image where you have two images. And you're starting to wonder if you've just had one too many beers, right? When you play this, you can tell there's something a little bit odd about it. At regular zoom too, it looks a little bit jittery, or it looks a little bit blurry. And so that's not really a good way to transition to do the interpolation. So let's look at option number 3. With option number 3, you actually do what we call motion estimation. You draw sort of a box here, and you say, okay, let's track it. Let's put the motion tracker right on it, and try to determine where did it move. Did it move this way, or did it move that way? So the motion tracker is going to do that for this little block. Well, it's not doing it for just that block. It's doing it for a lot more. In fact, if we look at, let me see if I change the brush to something a little bit smaller there. Let's go simple brush, medium, that might do. So I do one block here, I do another block here, and I do another block here. And then I have a motion tracker on this block, and a motion tracker on this block, and another one here. So each of those is going to have sort of a motion tracker centered right there, to determine where did this little block of pixels move to on the next frame. Did it move this way? Or did it move that way? Or did it move more this way at this distance? And so on. So each element, each block is being tracked. And in fact, you can see when you use the motion tracker, let me go and reset that. This is what it looks like. Let's first look at the final result, right? So here's the motion interpolated animation. You don't see any frame blending in and out. It's just moving very smoothly and softly, and there's hardly any artifacts, any strobing, any blinking, any I don't know what you want to call it. Just very little disturbance. Even here on this pole. Now, occasionally you'll see something, and it may just catch your eye, but most of the time it's going to be good. Where you can expect to see some disturbance is along the edges. There is a band here of about 12 pixels where it's not going to know what to do, because it doesn't know what's beyond it. On the left side, it doesn't know how to interpolate or extrapolate from that. Same thing with the bottom. So all around it, there will be a little bit of a blurry condition along the top. Now, if the image is blurry to begin with, like if it's noisy like this, you may not notice. So, but when you have something like this here, there you will definitely notice. There you see that the image is broken. So what we do with that usually is we ignore it, or we zoom in to blend it out, to crop it out, right? After we've done this motion interpolation, we can zoom in a little bit to the point by 12 pixels where we just don't see this anymore. And the thing is, there are some parts when if it moves too fast, we can still see something else happening. Like for instance here, as this window disappears behind the front tower, it might shoot in a little bit before it starts blending through. But you know, at regular zoom, try to guess where that happens. It's really difficult to see. And the whole thing about motion estimation, or we call it motion prediction, is that there are some cases where it doesn't work too well, and especially if things move too fast or along the edges. But sometimes you can touch up or fix it a little bit, and much of the animation here is absolutely usable and doesn't suffer much from any sort of artifacts, any sort of strobing, any sort of roping, any sort of blinking, nothing like that. So what you see here is actually animated, and it looks pretty darn good if you ask me. Pardon my French, but this is really good. And you can see now we have initially 4 frames. And now we have 221. Now the first one here, we might delete. Actually the last one. Actually it doesn't matter. These are all good. You can keep them all. But let me show you how actually I got to that, right? This is just the final result. So again, we start from initially just 4 frames. Let's go from here. No, not from here. Load sequence. There. 4 frames. And I load those 4 frames. and I'm going to say, okay, we don't want to play those, we want to play it much slower, slow motion. And so now there's not a lot of motion, but there's enough to actually see a little advance where the camera is moving into the scene, and you see some perspective changes here. And what we want to do is slow this down. So let's go super slow motion under the filter animated and motion prediction module. Now what you do is you initially do a dry run, test it, right? And just go and see what happens. Now this is going to go to 7 frames, not a lot. Okay, we need much more. Let's give it more tweens right up here. Instead of 3 tweens, we're going to go with 22. So that builds it up to 45 frames. That's already nice. We don't see much artifacts. Let's play it again. Okay, let's go to 44. Now we get 89 frames. Isn't that lovely? Look at that. And when you think that it took an hour and a half for each of these initial 4 frames to be rendered, what a time saver that is now, that you can do this animation and have it very decent quality, where you don't have to spend an hour and a half for each of those 3 frames. They're rendered in about 1/10 of a second doing this motion interpolation. So this is a huge time saver. And what I'm going to do here is get it to the point where we get about 200. I don't know how high I need to go. Let's go 77 and see how many frames that gives me. 155, not quite there yet. I want to get to the point where I have about 220, or maybe a few more, and then I can trim down and cut off. So I'm going to go, let's say 88, 177. Okay, still not quite there. Let's go 99. Let's see what that gives us. 199 frames. Almost there. I bet if we go to 111, we are right on the money here. 223. That's just about right. So let's go with 111, or you know what, maybe 110. Something like that. Let's try that. 221 frames. Look at that. We delete one, namely the first one, because we know the first frame is always bad when we do motion interpolation. It's actually a replica of the very last frame in our algorithm. So the first frame will delete, which means after 221, if we take one off, we have exactly what we're looking for, 222. Lucky strike here on this one. Coincidence. But let's go and do that. Let's go and say no more dry run. Maybe we want to do a refinement pass, best quality, sub-pixel resolution. Just read the tooltip for the details on those. But what this is going to give you is really the very best possible animation. You could, if the video is actually live video and there's a lot of noise, you could also give it a subsampling of 5 stochastics. It'll take longer though, and sometimes there's just no justification for that. So I'm going to go like this and render that. And so at this time, in about a few seconds, I will have 221 frames, of which 220 are usable, and that is already done. So it took what, 5 or 6 seconds. This first frame we can ditch. Let's go get deleted, and now we have 220 frames, and that's exactly what I did. Now I'm going to store this animation just so we have a comparison with the others. And so now that we have this animation here, if I load this one again, the original had a frame blending approach. You see a lot of roping. Let's see this. This is so ghosted, so ghost imaging. Look at that. Look at how noisy that is. If you play it regular speed, 30 frames a second. Look at how that looks. You can tell there's something really odd about it. Well, now let's go and animate this with the animation with motion interpolation. And I'm going to zoom in till we see the same area. Just around here. And what's happening here is that these pixels, these blocks with the motion tracker, were just moving along and detecting where they moved and interpolating. So that's the beauty of motion interpolation, is that it can give you a much better, not always will, but it can, in theory, and in many cases, can give you a much smoother transition without much of the flickering or strobing or other types of effects. Look at that. Now you see right here a little bit glitch here, right? See that? There's a little glitch there. Well, we didn't notice that until we zoomed in. And you may not worry about that, but if you need to do something about it, you can paint right in there. You can go and grab the custom brush selector. Where is it? Right there. And say, for instance, pick this little pixel there. That's now in your brush, so you can paint it. Let's go to the paint tool, the brush tool, and paint it right over there. There it is, it's gone. Do the same thing with this one and the next one, and then do that on the next frame, or perhaps do that first on the next frame. So you go to the next frame, blend this one out, blend this one out, and look at that. In just a few seconds we have fixed that. I'm just painting over that. I can enable the preview. Where is it? There, PRV, so that shows me the brush. There it is. And I can go to the next. Oh no, that's not the place where I want it, so let's do undo. There you go, that's where I want it, because that's where it's the same hue. It's a very small brush, just 4 pixels or something like that. So we have essentially a bunch of images here that are all good now, and still got one there, and that it. I think that's it. No, one more there, and one more. So we have a couple of noisy pixels here that the motion prediction module produced, but all in all, what a time saver. Look at that. We now have a beautiful animation there. There's one more too. And we could do the same thing over here. I would just grab a slightly different set of the background image to clone around there. And by the way, you can use that with the clone mode. So there is a clone mode here, and you might actually be able to apply that even across the whole image sequence or a part of the frame. So there's sometimes ways to make this go even faster than what I just did here, which is the manual approach to gradually go in there. But yeah, now that we know about this, we'll be looking at that and it'll catch our eye. But you know, if you look at the rest of the animation, it's absolutely beautiful. And of course, the nice thing about that is that then you can really start focusing on what else you want to do with that. You know, maybe you want to give it a bit more of a photographic special effect, like light diffusion, or let's say soft contrast enhancement. And with that, you can give it more contrast, give it a little bit more exposure, a little bit more softness on the edges, and give it a very different, drastically different appearance. Let's go do that. Then we do also, let's say, perhaps do the light diffusion coming up any moment. There it is, a light diffusion. Let's go give that a little bit of glare, right? This is the glint or the glare effect. And let's give it something like that. You could do a dark diffusion or light diffusion. Precise mode is recommended if you want a good high quality final render on that. And then, of course, another thing that also is desired is to give it a bit more crispness or sharpness. And so you can go to the filter. Wait, it's still rendering. There you go. Another thing you can do is add some sharpness, and we have a Sharpen Filter here, which we call the Digital Photo Enhance, which is absolutely beautiful to give you better contrast without giving too much noise to it, right? So if you don't do it, then you see it like this. And if you add a little bit, look at that, you start seeing it pops out. I mean, it kind of jumps into your eyes. Look at that. You can focus on HSV, hue saturation value, or YUV. Don't ask me what that means. And it's been a long day. I'm going to finish this recording just showing you kind of the final render and animation. And hopefully you'll realize that, you know, you can use Dog Waffle for just about $7. This motion prediction module and many of these filters are already in version 7, so you can certainly create a lot of great effects on your videos or still images. If you have an image sequence of just 4 or 5 images, you can easily turn that into an animation that is based on motion interpolation, as long as it doesn't move too fast, and as long as there are, you know, ways to predict where certain pieces move from one frame to the next, right? Because that's what it's all about. When you do the motion interpolation, let me show that one more time here. When you go to the animated motion prediction module, you can see here how far we're looking. This is the search distance. This is how far we're looking for any of the blocks to move. Now, what blocks, you might ask? Well, of course, these blocks right here. the grid spacing indicates the distance or the size of each motion tracker. Each motion tracker is placed in the middle of these blocks. Each square contains one motion tracker that's going to track that particular block. Okay, and so that's basically, well, that's I was going to say that's all there is to it, but it's really huge. There's a lot of calculations there. Here we have an article on our website that talks about that. It's called the Motion Prediction Mania, and it's just fabulous how many teraflops of calculations are possible nowadays on a regular PC. I mean, this outnumbers the calculation power, computational power of the board computer on the space shuttle by eons. It's absolutely amazing, and you can see the benefit of it here when it's calculating how each of these blocks is being tracked to see where it moved, right, within a certain distance, to find the nearest candidates, and then based on that do an interpolation with so many frames, 110 frames. Each of the blocks is moved 110 times in between from one to the next frame. That's the target. Right, so that's that on this little intro on, or summary rather, on the motion prediction module. Hope you liked it. Hope you can see the value of it. If you do 3D animation or video work, I'm sure there's going to be a way to use that in your workflow as well. Thanks for watching.